First and Four, Scottish Eye presents new evidence on the mystery surrounding the death of SNP activist Willie Macrae.
On Friday, the 5th of April, 1985, Willie Macrae, a brilliant Glasgow lawyer and a leading Scottish nationalist, left his Glasgow home and set off for his holiday cottage in Kintail on the west coast of Scotland. He was never to complete the journey. That day, Willie Macrae drove to his death.
The fact that if you make an objection, if as an individual or as a group of individuals or as a small community, you wish to make an objection at a formal planning inquiry, then no matter how much that objection costs you, no matter how successful you are in your objection, you will not be able at the end of the day, as the law stands, to recover one single brass farthing of your expenses. That one of the primary tasks of an independent...
Willie Macrae was an extraordinary man. Born in 1923, he represented the Scottish National Party in 4 general elections and rose to become its vice-chairman. During the war, he fought in France and India, became a friend of Indira Gandhi, and gave clandestine help to India's freedom fighters. His career ranged from a spell in military intelligence to helping write Israel's mercantile law. In 1980, at the Mulwarcher inquiry, Macrae played the key role in defeating plans by the UK Atomic Energy Authority to dump nuclear waste beneath the hills of Ayrshire.
Ladies and gentlemen, what did we learn from this inquiry? First, I hope that all of you learned, if you hadn't known ever before, that all of you learned that you don't trust the political establishment in Scotland or in Britain. And that's lesson number 1.
Macrae was feted as the hero of the anti-dumping lobby, and in the build-up to the 1986 inquiry into expansion at Dounreay, that lobby was again pinning many of its hopes on his skills. But Willie Macrae was never to appear.
We were driving round the corner on the bend of the road that we're standing beside today on our way to Skye, and we were hailed by somebody who turned out to be an Australian tourist who indicated that there was a car off the road and felt there was somebody in the car who was dying. And we left our own vehicle and proceeded down the side of the hill.
When you got there, what did you find?
We found a maroon Volvo facing back up towards the road, which had an SNP symbol on the front left-hand corner of the windscreen, and to my amazement it was Willie Macrae, somebody who I'd known personally for many years.
David Coates knew Willie Macrae because he was a member of the same party. Coates was, and still is, an SNP councillor in Dundee. A passenger in Coates' car was a doctor, Dorothy Messer.
The only injury I could see was a wound on the right temple, the right-hand side of his head. There was blood matted in his hair, and some blood had dried on the side of his face, you know, where it had run down. That was the only thing I could find.
No signs of other scratches or bruising or
No,
anything?
no.
Was there anything around the car?
I wasn't really looking, but David Coates came down to the car, and when he looked around he found some papers torn up, slightly uphill from the car.
It was all from a Kyle Welsh garage with Mr Macrae's name on it, which clearly proved to the police that we had acknowledged that it was Willie Macrae in the car. There was his watch, and there were some pieces of paper ripped up, and there may have been a credit card, but I wouldn't swear by that.
And how far from the car was this path?
Certainly 20 or 25 feet, going back northeasterly towards the lay-by. In fact, the direction the car was facing, between the car and the road.
As if it had been placed there deliberately?
Well, I wouldn't like to say why it was there, but it was, you know, it was there, and it was in a tidy, compact bundle. It wasn't as if the paper was flying all over the place. It was... somebody had put it there.
The next week, the papers carried the news. Macrae had been in a coma for more than 8 hours before being found on Saturday morning. He never regained consciousness and died in hospital early on Sunday. The Inverness Procurator Fiscal, Thomas Aitchison, the official who must, under Scots law, investigate all sudden deaths, issued a statement.
The death has been fully investigated. There is no suspicious circumstances in this case.
Those words, however ungrammatical, may come back to haunt the authorities. A few weeks later, Macrae's death certificate was lodged at Register House. It contained surprising news. According to the official report, Macrae had died of a gunshot wound to his head. The scenario painted by the authorities was simple. Macrae was known to carry an unlicensed .22 revolver. That night, he drove while drunk and crashed. In a fit of remorse, he was already facing a second drink driving charge. He turned his gun on himself.
What was your reaction when it was said that he had committed suicide?
I just couldn't believe it. My wife and I were absolutely astounded at this suggestion. We decided that we should, off our own bat, ask the right authorities for a proper investigation to be done into it.
I knew he wouldn't have done. He couldn't have done it. That wasn't Willie, and everything was going well for Willie, and he was the sort of man he was a very caring person, and he got a great many responsibilities that he took on as personal responsibilities to do with friends and clients and whatnot. And Willie Macrae wasn't the sort of man that would actually push that aside and kill himself without making preparation beforehand.
Willie had so many plans ahead of what he was going to do, and he was such a grand fellow, and I refused to see he did not commit suicide. I'm convinced that Willie was murdered.
Following Macrae's death, there were persistent demands for a fatal accident inquiry, but all were refused. It is a supreme irony that a Scottish patriot such as Macrae was denied an inquiry which in England and Wales would have been mandatory. Instead, on the 1st of July that year, the then Lord Advocate, Lord Cameron of Lochbroom, issued a statement.
There are no circumstances to warrant criminal proceedings. The results of the Procurator Fiscal's full investigation have been disclosed to the next of kin. His brother has expressed his satisfaction with the extent of that investigation and has no wish for a public inquiry.
It was just a few days before he died. He was very cock-a-hoop because he reckoned that he'd found something. He was involved, or going to be involved in an inquiry into the nuclear industry appertaining to Scotland. And he said that he'd now got something that they wouldn't be able to wriggle out of. And he really was, he could be like that, you know, quite devilish. And he slapped the table and he was delighted, that quite definite that he'd found something, or he'd got some evidence that they wouldn't be able to wriggle out of.
At the same time, Macrae expressed deep concern over the death of Hilda Murrell, who was murdered in mysterious circumstances some months earlier. She too had been preparing a case against nuclear expansion, in her case at Sizewell. It has since been claimed her death came during a bungled break-in at her Shrewsbury home by the security services.